Hello there, and welcome back to the channel. Man, this show has been awesome. I've been loving almost every minute of this season. You know, Invincible is one of the only shows I've recently watched where I can actually say it feels like a TV show. Which, yeah, sounds kind of backwards obviously, but let me explain. I've mentioned many times on this channel that I've gotten pretty tired of the heavily serialized format most shows have gone with in the streaming era. You essentially get a maximum of 9 episodes a season where the story feels like an extended movie. While Invincible obviously has a cap of 8 episodes a season, it has a more traditional episodic format. Now, I do think there's an argument to be made that this should be spread out over 20 episodes with like 25 minutes apiece, but I don't have a huge problem with the pacing in this show. While there are a few nitpicks I'll share throughout the video, overall, I had a lot of fun with this season. This video contains full spoilers for Season 3, so if you haven't watched yet, come back after you've watched. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe for more rambles. Okay, so I loved the first arc. Everything about the Cecil versus Invincible debate was so interesting to see. We can obviously understand why Cecil is so pressed about Invincible's powers. We quite literally see why during the Invincible War. And going further, it's not even about whether Mark himself turns evil. I mean, if someone mind controls him, Earth is kinda cooked. At the same time, yeah, Cecil is being absolutely unhinged with how he's doing things. Bro, the way he implanted that chip during surgery was crazy. That is a complete breach of privacy. Cecil, I know you're just looking out for the world, but you can't be so sus about it. You literally got half of the new Guardians of the Globe dipping because of your antics.
When will you learn? When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
So, yeah, I pretty much loved every aspect of this arc. I really like what they did with Oliver as well. At first, I thought he was going to be really annoying and whiny like Damian Wayne, but he moved past that pretty quickly. It was interesting seeing his arc from wanting to kill people to actively wanting to help others by the end of the season. Which I guess is straight out of the Damian Wayne arc, but it only took a couple episodes here instead of a couple movies like in the DC AMU. Anyways, I also loved the fight scene with Doc Seismic. He's quickly become one of my favorite villains in this universe. I love how over the top he is.
If I'm going down, so is everyone!
Oh, and finally Eve and Mark got together.
Finally, some action!
The will they won't they trope is one of my least favorite tropes ever used. I mean, I'd rather watch the entirety of the Rise of Skywalker than even remotely think about this trope. I was mad when Mark got with Amber even before her writing became dumb. I know it's comic accurate or whatever, but I hate it when characters are clearly meant to be together, but they hold it off for the dumbest reasons. Anyways, I'm glad they didn't waste too much of my time with Mark and Eve opening up to each other. I've seen plenty of other shows where the characters get mad or really weird with each other, and that drags on for like 2 seasons. I'm glad that didn't happen here. I really liked that scene of Mark and Eve on their date in episode 4. It was a really pleasant sequence of the two just being together. And honestly, this relationship might have been what anchored the season for me. If you saw my season 2 review, you'll know my one gripe with that season was how directionless the season felt. It was still a lot of fun, but I didn't really care about the Angstrom-Levy fight because there was no good build-up for it. Which is an extreme contrast to what happened in season 1 with trying to uncover Omni-Man's secrets. Now, it's not like season 3's finale had much build-up from the rest of the season, at least plot-wise. Really, episode 7 with the Invincible War was the only thing that directly led into the finale. However, one thing that stayed consistent this season was Mark and Eve's relationship. Whatever challenges Mark faced, related to the main quest or not, he would always talk with Eve. Mark would contemplate his ideals and if he's doing the right thing. I think those conversations really give that emotional through line I felt was missing in season 2. It's weird how one seemingly small addition elevates the entire experience for me. Now, out of all the episodes, I think 5 was the weakest. Which is crazy to say because I really enjoyed that episode. Titan's character is super intriguing, and I love Machine Head's auto-tuned voice.
What the hell? You caught me in a once-in-a-lifetime good mood. Okay.
I think I just felt that the episode was the most disconnected from everything else, and it didn't have an emotional gut punch like in the Powerplex episode. Episode 4 was maybe the second weakest, but that's only because, again, the first half with Future Immortal felt disconnected from everything else. Still a fun episode though. The last half where Alan rescued Omni-Man was awesome, and we finally had the return of the Beast. The Powerplex episode is easily one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. Now, obviously we all know Mark was the victim of Omni-Man's rage in Chicago. But no matter what Mark or anyone else tells Scott, no matter how much evidence to the contrary it is, Scott blames Invincible for the death of his sister and niece. I found this one Reddit post explaining Powerplex's motivation, and it's beautifully illustrated. It's important that the show opens on a scene that lets us experience Scott's trauma. The powerlessness he felt during it all is one thing, the horror he experienced is another. But the worst part, he survived. And his family, his young niece, did not. The thing that drove him mad was survivor's guilt. It's important to establish why he could think it was Invincible's fault. What he saw from his vantage point certainly made it seem that way. He sees Invincible holding Jessica's severed arm in the wreckage of the city. And then he just talks to his dad. They don't seem to be fighting. Moments later, Scott hears the screams of the people in the subway. Over time, he should have realized the truth, especially with his GTA access. Why doesn't he? Listen to what he says to Invincible.
Why do you get to live when so many others died? What makes you so special?
This is Scott talking to himself through Invincible. He hates himself and he's projecting survivor's guilt onto Mark. He needs to hate Mark because the only other option in his mind is to blame himself. This is a story about the weight of violence and trauma, what it does to a person, the kind of poison it is, and how deep it runs. Scott dragged his wife and child into his toxic emotions, made them complicit in it. He couldn't bear how bad it felt to have watched his sister and niece die. So, he made it someone else's fault. And all the security footage in the world can't convince him that what he saw and felt that day weren't real. This post perfectly explains why I love the dynamic between these two so much. Like Mark, we want to see Scott heal from his trauma. We want Mark to reconcile with him and fix his pain. But Powerplex is so blinded by revenge, by the dark side, that he is not willing to help himself. This goes so far that he kills his wife and child, the only people left that he loves. This is what the dark side does to you. It is a spiraling cycle of anger and pain. Seeing the buildup of Powerplex's unhinged behavior was great to see. Obviously, we could see he was hurting his family more and more as the episode went on, especially as it came to his child, but it was so shocking to see his family get eviscerated. Now, personally, I'm glad the wife died. Look, if she wanted to endanger herself, that's on her, or whatever. But the fact that she allowed her baby to be at that fight, that's just plain evil. And this guy has the gall to say Invincible was responsible for the death of his wife and kid. Moving on to the final two episodes, I loved this arc. As I mentioned earlier, I wasn't the biggest fan of Angstrom Levy in Season 2. This was mostly because I never felt much of a personal connection between Invincible and Levy, so I never cared much for this lineup. While that's still the case with Round 2, I loved everything about Levy's plan. This entire episode was just insane. Seeing the Mark variants absolutely destroy the planet was absolutely crazy. I loved the shots of the variants overlooking the world burning. I don't know, something about it just gave me chills. The amount of trauma and demoralization mainline Mark has gone through is just sad. I heard someone say the writers are really just trying to beat up Invincible to becoming an anti-hero. And yeah, that's 100% the case. I think some people were annoyed that Mark stayed behind to protect Eve, and while I can certainly understand that annoyance, this is 100% in his character. I mean, if it was your loved one who had a big chance of being attacked, would you leave to protect the rest of the world? That end fight with Angstrom Levy was really cool, by the way. I liked a lot of the motions Invincible was making trying to avoid the portals. Doing all this flying and loop-de-looping. Man, and after all that, after the destruction of the planet, after everyone blames him, the fact that Conquest decided this was the time to confront Mark was diabolical.
Yo, come on, man. I can't have shit in this house!
Bruh, who does this Thanos looking fool think he is? This fight was amazing. I mean, my jaw was continually dropped the entire episode. Bruh, the way Conquest dragged Mark through all those people was just insane. I guess that's the Viltrumite specialty. And that monologue of him feeling lonely was just so creepy. It adds an interesting layer of depth while somehow making him an even scarier villain. Sure, he looked formidable before, especially as he was tossing Mark and Oliver around, but something about the cracks in his voice and his sincerity made him sound like a horror villain. I was creeped out hearing that speech, if you couldn't tell. Oh, and of course, I actually thought they killed off Eve for a second. I mean, it would be exactly like this show to build up literally 3 seasons of this relationship, only to terminate it as it was finally blossoming. But I'm glad she wasn't killed off.
Don't scare me like that, colonizer.
Luckily, she locked in at the last second to give Mark the opening to give the killing blow. Or blows. Yeah, Mark is not okay. Everything about the Eve versus Conquest fight was it was peak. There's really only so many flying punches and kicks I can take before it gets stale. Not that Mark and Oliver versus Conquest was bad by any means, but Adam Eve's fight against him was on another level. The force stun, the armor, all those combos.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Overall, I loved this season of Invincible. It's probably my favorite so far. The 4th and 5th episodes were a small dip for me, but I was always invested and excited for every scene in these 8 episodes. As much as I loved season 1, it still has the stain of Amber in it. And while season 2 was fun, it ultimately felt a little all over the place, especially with that dumb 4-month break. Season 3 is great because while it has that traditional episodic feel I really enjoy, it still feels grounded in an overall arc for Invincible. The continuous call to the dark side he must reject. The continual struggle he faces to remain optimistic in a cruel and unforgiving world. What makes this show so great is that Mark has black and white values in an often morally gray world. That's what makes this such an engaging watch. This is perfectly illustrated with Mark's conversations with Eve. We see his inner struggles and how he reacts to situations every episode. We see how he almost killed Angstrom Levy, but with his brother there, he rejected the call to the dark side. I mean, it's this kind of stuff. This is what really grounds this season for me. Lastly, I wanted to address the animation in the show. I've seen quite a few people complain about the animation quality and how stinted it feels. But as someone who went to school for animation, I don't see a huge problem. I'm not going to argue this is the best animation I've ever seen, and there is certainly room for improvement, especially when it comes to dialogue scenes. I thought the final portion of the fight with Powerplex left a bit to be desired as well. But I think saying the show has bad animation is a bit of an overreach. This is bad animation.
I wish I could be...
Sparky, stop. This is not a musical.
No, it's a gulag.
Oh, but the moment I complain about anime, I just don't understand the art style. There are moments in these shows where it's blatantly obvious these are stills. This was a big reason I avoided anime for years, because this kind of stinted animation is everywhere. But that doesn't mean these shows are bad or remotely lower quality, especially when they lock in for the fight scenes. Again, this is not to say Invincible's animation can't or shouldn't get better. I just don't understand the super harsh criticism surrounding it. But that's pretty much all I got for you guys this time. Let me know what your thoughts on Invincible Season 3 were. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or were you somewhere in the middle? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.